I have some really good, interesting news. A few, actually. One, I'm actually pretty energetic today. I'm not quite sure why. It's like 11 o'clock and I'm wide awake. I slept extraordinarily well yesterday. Usually I don't sleep at all. And so maybe that has something to do with it. Or the protests. You have protests at this point going all the way in Germany. Think about that. Think about that. Like, how is that not mind-blowing on some level? Germany, Sydney, Australia, London. Oh, well, that's a whole nother video. The all of these places, France, you have firefights, they're throwing literal fire, Germany or in Greece at the U.S. Embassy. How is this not mind-blowing? The entire world that is at this point automated and connected, meaning anything that takes place in anywhere in the world, basically, goes everywhere else in the world. Your world is connected. And that connected world in the United States saw protests. The United States does not necessarily do protests because usually those people are working so hard they don't have the opportunity to do so. 40 million people are out of a job. You have a lot of people on the streets. Instigated by an African American who was basically killed by a cop doing what he would have done for years. Meaning the death of Floyd was basically replicated over and over and over again. That took place for years. Like, people were being killed for years. Cops were kneeling on people's throat for years. I can show you a video going back to the 60s where they did the exact same thing to a woman that they did to Floyd. And that death, for whatever reason, took off. This is kind of like the Rosa Parks thing. Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, we're looking for a spark, meaning something that ignited something else. It's almost this kind of weird ethereal thing where righteous indignation took off like wildfire. All across the United States, every state, 50 states, black, white, gay, straight, trans, etc. All out on the streets, angry. You killed that guy. You kneeled on that man's throat for 9 minutes. That is unacceptable. Now, you have people in Europe, and I thought to myself, whoa, what is going on around the world that is creating this much anger and indignation? It can't just be Floyd. I could be wrong on this, but I would point out that all of these people all around the world in all of these countries and many of these people who are even in the United States, there is something that they recognize that is wrong with the system. And this event basically set off something where those people, yes, might have been very pissed off at what took place with Floyd. They were pissed off with Donald Trump's reaction, basically saying, I'm going to throw in the military, which basically had the public with this almost forced need to react. But I suspect that a lot of this has to do with a broader anger at the way our system is organized. And I don't necessarily think that has words yet. I don't necessarily think people have formulated that into, the demand of sorts. But it's there. It's there. I think the question that I think people need to ask is, why do you need the police in the first place? I think, why is that not the question? If you're talking about the police is landing on a man's throat, yes, that's true. That is fucking horrendous. I guess my first question is, why did you need the cop in the first place to even be there to kneel on a man's throat? That seems like the operative question. Going into the notion of defunding the police kind of misses the point of why the police are there in the first place, right? We want to defund it. Yes, I get that. But do you have areas in your neighborhoods with crime? Yay or nay? And if the answer is yes, without having police there, would it incentivize those people to be that much more criminal, seeing as the incentives to which they work on requires them to be that much more criminal? The answer is yes. You're in this weird quagmire of, we need to be able to eliminate these areas that are bad in our society. So you don't necessarily need the cops to be there. That's what the question needs to get to. So it's like, I appreciate the rage and indignation. And I think part and parcel to the reason why all of these people are out there is because on some level they get it. even if they can't necessarily formulate it. And if they're going to sublimate their own desires or angers and frustrations, this is the fastest thing moving. I would just point this out. I think it's obvious at this point that there is something wrong with your world if this many people are coming out in all of these countries. There is something that is similar, that is connected to all of these people in all of these countries. And I would point to you that I think the thing is the inequality. That's the thing that I think you're trying to get to. The level of inequality in your system that requires and forces that system to find ways to maintain order to keep that inequality in place. The cops are basically the paid poor to keep the other poor in line. Your issue is the inequality. The inequality is why you have the frustration. It's why you have the friction in your system. It's the thing that allows the cops, or basically requires, or at the very least, their heads is, we need to throw more cops at that issue. The budget of the cops is like $1 billion. It's fucking insane. Like, think of the money that could be used if you put resources into your communities as opposed to using those resources to give the fucking Jeff Bezos. Like, you have all the wealth that you need to do everything that you need in your society to ensure that nobody in your society is poor. And answer to me, what is more likely? If the people in your society had a job when they wanted it, had food, if there was a mandate that people had jobs, a workers' bill of rights. If you're a person in this country, you're not going to go poor, you're not going to go without a house, you're not going to, etc. You could do that. What would your country be like without poverty? Now, people was like, whoa, that's not fucking extreme. That's a choice. That's something that your society chooses to do. What do you do with your resources? It's that simple. And if you're putting your resources into the people of your society, do you believe that society will have more or less crime than society that you have in the way that you organize it? Those questions and the reason why you have cops to some degree needs to get to the root of why you have cops. Why is that guy there in the first place to put his knee on that man's neck? That guy's there because ultimately the system says in order to keep order, we need to put cops in those areas that we define as being necessary, crime-ridden, or at the very least too poor to do anything in regards to when we put crimes on them. The issue is inequality. The issue is poverty. That's my thought. I mean, that's not necessarily, I think, the way this is being talked about. I think this is going to be co-opted to some degree, or at the very least a strong attempt is. But talking about cops and talking about cops being racist is really too limited. I mean, yes, the guy may be racist, fair enough, but somebody who's not racist could have done the same thing. Like, they could have just as well have been a black cop that did the exact same thing. I hope you understand what I mean. This is not entirely that guy's racist, so that guy acted that way. This is not a bad apple issue. This is a system that requires these guys, and these guys have no capacity to do anything to stop the crime to which they interact with, other than take those people to jail. To which a judge will wag his finger at them and say, you're a horrible, horrible person, and he'll send them to jail. And at no point will how were you raised? What was the conditions that you lived in? Who was your mom? Who was your dad? Meaning, what did your society do to you for you to turn out this way? And are we doing something in our society that is producing people, meaning producing the crime to which we bitch about? And if the answer is yes, your question is why? Deal with that. The problem is there's no capacity in your political system to deal with that. And because there's not a capacity in your political system to deal with that, they throw in cops. Because the honest answer is yes. If Jeff Bezos is not a billionaire, the answer is yes, we can do that. If Jeff Bezos or if Bill Gates or the Waltons didn't have $1 billion, yes, we could do those things. We can cut down on the crime rate. We can cut down on the necessary amount of people who maintain some level of order. We can do those things. We choose not to do those things. It's a choice. Stop fucking around. If you're going to be this angry, and if you're going to have this many protests all across Washington, D.C., I was down there today, and I was listening to the guy who was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Your issue, like, look, you don't want to be out there telling people load your weapons. That is horrendous. That is not what you want to be telling people. And the speech that the guy gave was kind of like, I load my weapon and I'm teaching my kid to load his weapon. And it's like, dude, that misses the point entirely. Like, yes, cops may be racist. People are racist. I mean, for fuck's sake, this is America. That's not necessarily a shocking thing. And the inequitable way that they dispense justice. Yes, again, that is not entirely different, even though it's onerous, in this sense. I don't like interacting with cops. I just don't. I look at them as human beings, and they don't look at me as human beings. There's a difference in those things. And that distinction can get you killed. So, all things being equal, I prefer to not engage cops at all. I've loaded weapons. Infinite justice! Moment's notice. I've seen them shoot guys who are just reaching for their license. So, by the same token, I recognize that as human beings, they function in a particular culture. And that if I had the misfortune of being in that spot, I may actually even behave the same way. So, it's, I don't know. It's a quagmire in a sense of, all right, you need to get rid of this. All right, how do you get rid of this? Well, what are the things that require that? Well, that's never going to be touched. When you're asking people to say, defund the police, and oftentimes people don't know what that means, meaning they don't know what comes after that. The issue is, well, what do you have in your system to just keep order? That's basically the question that you're trying to ask. And is there a way of doing that without necessarily having maniacs on the street with weapons? But the term defund the police is somewhat problematic. People don't know what that means. Nevertheless, Minneapolis, I'll cut this video. This went long. Minneapolis, Minnesota is making the choice to potentially do just that. Defund the police. In fact, they're going further. Disband the police. Disband. 9 Minneapolis City Council members on Sunday announced plans to disband the city's police department. They did not offer a timeline or specific actions they plan to take, but they said they are, quote unquote, taking intermediate steps towards ending the force. The groups represents a majority of the 12 people person council. Now, whether they do it or not, who knows? But that's ballsy. Now, understand the why. People may say, wow, that's pretty extreme. Put this in perspective. You have ignited protests that burned down the Minneapolis police station. This. Right here. That's the police station. Burn it down. Now, on top of that, you have protests all the way in Germany, Australia, Sydney, Australia, Berlin, the UK. You have them all over the world, France. Now, you've ignited something. Like, I've been in Washington, D.C. They've had protests all the way in D.C. Do you realize Donald Trump has barricaded himself in the White House? He has metal bars going all the way around the White House. There are more bars, meaning in miles, around the White House than he's built in the wall. He's terrified. That coward was in a bunker when Washington, D.C. was in flames. You've set something off that has gone on for 2 weeks. Think of the amount of energy that people are expending and getting out of their houses, walking. Miles. Millions of people. What does that equal in the standpoint of the amount of energy expended? That's the least they can do. I hope you understand my point. Disbanding the police department is not an extreme step at all when you're trying to acknowledge that you've done something wrong and something needs to change in this process, and you earnestly believe it needs to change. Then that's not extreme. That's what you would logically do to try to fix an issue that your society and your community has come around and says, you know what? We don't like that. That shouldn't have happened. Not to mention, we're embarrassed by that because the entire world is watching that. If you ask a European country, is America racist? They would say, fuck yes. They would say, fuck yes. Now, from the American context, we would go over there and say, these guys are less racist. Because they look at you more so as an American as opposed to a black American. That's something you experience when you're going abroad. It's weirder in Africa. It's a little weirder in Africa. And Africa's like, hey, brother, and that type of stuff. Look, I'm just saying, if you have ignited something that has gone on for 2 weeks and made it evolve into something else, then yes, you need to have some level of trying to repair that and trying to get across to the community that we understand. We're the government. We're supposed to serve the community. This is not serving the community. We're going to make a change. We earnestly, legitimately will make a change. Disbanding the police station, yeah, that tries to get that across. But the question is always, what comes after? And that is always more interesting to me. In fact, the two things that are interesting to me has less to do with the police. Why are they there? What comes after when you get rid of them if you don't deal with the economic part? Like if your answer is, look, we just need to get the police out. And it's like, yes, but do you have crime? And do you want the police to actually tackle the crime? That if the answer becomes, well, no, then it becomes, okay, you realize there are going to be people who are very angry at you because they're not going to want to live in those neighborhoods that are crime ridden. Now, the catch becomes, okay, well, what are we going to do with those neighborhoods? Yes, that's the question. Meaning, the cops are there entirely for the neighborhoods. And the question becomes, how do you get rid of the crime in those neighborhoods? That goes into the, yes, cops are racist, cops behave in that way, but I want to eliminate the reason for those cops. And so it's like, yes, defund the cops, come up with other ways to deal with control or whatnot, or order in your community. But by the same token, I guess I focus a lot of emphasis on the economic part of this. Because I think if you deal with the economic part, you get rid of the need for the cops. That's all. That's kind of the way I see it. I find that the cop thing is pertinent. And I find it's necessary because these guys are fucking maniacs. But beyond that point, it's like, I know there are some really horrible fucking neighborhoods. Now the catch becomes, I don't want those neighborhoods to be horrible. I don't want those cops to have an excuse to fuck around those neighborhoods any more than they fuck around the other neighborhoods that are not. There's a clear bias in regards to the way wealth is distributed in this country. And that bias also goes towards the way cops do their jobs and where they do their jobs. And so all of those things need to be discussed in a sense of this kind of intermingling between race and class. When you have a situation where whites have, 100,000 on average and blacks have 8,000? Oh, that's horrible. That's horrible. And you look at that and say, well, fuck, man. The legacy of slavery is pretty fucking long. Other people look at that and say, those black folks need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Now, the person who's saying this, of course, is part of that part with the 108,000. Something's wrong with this equation. Something's wrong with this equation. I don't know how you balance that. And ergo, cops. Like, cops are there only to maintain order. Like, I keep trying to make this point. These guys are not good guys. They're only there for order. If you were living in Roman times where you had slaves and people were being beat on the street, cops would be there to allow the beating on the street to commence. If you had a slave that needed to be whipped, cops would be there to make sure that slave is getting whipped. If you were, in apartheid South Africa, the morality of it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. Infinite justice. In this case, these guys are being disbanded, potentially, maybe. I mean, who knows? I saw the mayor get shamed like nobody else. So I don't know what the mayor is going to do. The mayor actually may do it if the mayor can find something suitable coming afterwards where he can explain to the public, this is what's going to take place. Because I'm telling you, the majority of the public is not going to agree with the defund cops. Especially the majority of the public that enjoys the cop not bugging them. Meaning, they would have to go beyond their self-interest because this is not part of the self-interest. However, if you make this something about class where you get 40 million people who are out of a job, it expands. But still, a section of the population who's doing well is not going to buy the defund cop stuff because cops don't fuck with them in that way. Just saying. The argument needs to be made in a slightly different way. I'm not sure what that argument would be. Or it needs to be explained what that is. And maybe that's where the disconnect is going to become. Trump is going to argue that Democrats wants to get rid of cops. That's what I mean, the defund cop stuff. It's going to get cut in political language. Even if you're right on the argument, it's going to get cut in political language. And it's a little dicey to make that work. Biden is never going to agree with that. Trump is never, but it doesn't matter. Trump is still going to hit him for it. I gotta be honest though, I am really hardened by these protests. I am really hardened by this. I love it. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.